Welcome back to Storytelling That Sells, the podcast brought to you by StorytellingThatSells.biz. I'm Richard D'Ambrosio. This is episode 3. And today we are going to discuss a little bit more of the neuroscience behind storytelling, because a lot of people who I work with, clients, they're attracted at the beginning. They kind of come into my sales funnel. There's something about storytelling that tells them, yes, I need to learn about this. And certainly all the other proponents of storytelling lately have certainly lifted my ability to attract clients. But then they really start to wonder how much of this is flim flam and how much of this is real. And I use a bunch of different tools to show them that. And what we're going to be talking about today is the neuroscience behind storytelling and why it is scientifically proven to do a better job of attracting someone to content. And if you want to replace the word content with marketing, go ahead. It is also the reason why people will stay longer in a piece of marketing if they're engaged. And there's a person who I consider myself a disciple of. His name is Paul Zak. Paul is a professor at Claremont University out in California in the graduate school. He has been studying neuroscience, over 20 plus years. And I'll tell you a little bit about my story, how I found him, and a little bit about his storytelling skills and how he's used it to prove the impact of storytelling. But before we go there, I want to talk a little bit about a very serious issue, storytelling that can work against society and can work against people. We had a horrible incident this weekend in the state of New York. A young man brought an assault rifle into a supermarket in a predominantly Black neighborhood, and he murdered 10 people and left 3 people injured. And the reason why I bring this up in a podcast about storytelling is because, like so many other people who can be influenced, this particular gentleman was sold on a story. He was sold on the story of something called replacement theory. And this has been peddled for decades by people who are afraid of people who don't look the same as them. And so currently in the world, replacement theory is being used by supremacists of one kind or another to convince people that they are working against forces that want them replaced. Now, here I am, I'm a white male, older in my years, and I don't ascribe to any of this. I would like to consider myself someone who, despite what people may think is happening in the world, I don't feel like I'm being replaced. And so maybe if I was to listen to this stuff, I would not buy into it as easily. But from what I understand and what I can see is that there are a lot of fearful white people out there. And to sort of push back on their fear, they're trying to get other people to be forceful against anyone who doesn't look like them. And that's a really easy story to tell. And we've seen it throughout the ages. We have seen it, of course, during World War II and leading up to World War II and Nazi Germany, where the stories that were peddled to Germans, to people of Germanic background, was that the Jews are coming to replace you. And as a result, people were willing to do awful things like throw rocks through windows of Jewish establishments, to herd Jewish people up into ghettos, and of course, the final solution. And it shows you that repeating a story over and over again that allows someone to personally feel the emotions that you're trying to get them to feel, and over time, then you can actually motivate them to take action. And that, of course, is the worst part of storytelling, is when it is used against humankind. And so we found a profound example of the power of storytelling and neuroscience, unfortunately, this weekend. And we've seen it in Christ Church. We saw it in the Pittsburgh synagogue. We saw it in the El Paso, I think it was a Walmart. We have seen brittle minds fall prey to stories And so while I'm not extremely happy about how storytelling sometimes is used in a deceitful manner, I am certain that the stories that some people have told have shown us that if we use it for good, it can have the opposite effect. And I'll talk a little bit about that at the wrap up. So let's get into the main part of the podcast today. There's this gentleman, Paul Zak, who has been studying this whole concept of how our brains can take over our bodies when stories are told. And I first heard about Paul Zak in, I think it was 2009. I used to listen to a podcast. Actually, it was a radio program that was then converted into an audio file. And I guess that was the early ages of podcasts. It was called Speaking of Faith with Krista Tippett out of Minnesota. It's now called On Being. So if you do go online, you can find this interview with Paul from 2009. But back then, he was talking about trust and how people's brains could adopt a certain set of behaviors because people were trusting. And Paul, at that point, was studying neuroeconomics, as he calls it, and how trust relates to economies. And certainly, I've seen this play out in commercials. I've seen it play out in corporations. When I've worked in corporations and counseled senior people leaders, I was looking to try to get them to tell stories that engendered more authentic personal connections with their employees so that those people could trust those leaders more, and as a result, take action with that trust but on behalf of the organization. So employee communications, town halls, the range of employee communications that I worked on for umpteen years in different corporations, and I also did some public relations as well, was really geared towards what Paul teaches, which is if you bring somebody slowly into a narrative about you and about where you are in a position, whether it's working for a company, owning your own business, the people who are most likely to take action will do so. And you are creating followership. For those people on the bell curve who are a little further away from natural followership, you still have a tremendous potential to impact them and draw them into those behaviors that you need for the organization to go forward. And so when I first found Paul in 2009, he had not yet done his famous 2011 TED Talk. I was enwrapped by some of his studies that he was already doing with MRIs. So he was putting people inside MRIs and studying the way their brain fires up. And he really started to understand the biochemistry of our brains and how we are naturally inclined to react in certain ways when connections are made. And then slowly but surely, Paul starts to, over his career, he starts to move in this direction of part of the reason why that biochemical reaction happens are these stories that shape our brains. And if you go to a really cool website, greatergood.com, it is actually part of the University of Berkeley website. So I think it actually has a berkeley.edu suffix. There's a story by Paul there in 2013, December 2013, about how stories change the brain. He tells a story as an example for his theories and was a study that he did using a foundation to solve child brain cancer. And he posed two different stories side by side to a group of people in the study. The first story that he tells is just openly saying, here's the father of this boy, Ben. And the father says, my son is dying. And we see Ben playing in the background. And Ben is 2 years old and he's not aware that he has a brain tumor and that his life is going to be cut short. This father is talking about his emotions and how hard it is to be joyful around his son when he knows what's going to happen. And it really treats us in a way where we have a choice to make. Let me tell you, let's go back to that bell curve of life. Not everybody is going to respond with the choking up inside your throat and the tear in your eye listening to Ben's father's story. There are some people on this bell curve who their brains are not wired for that, or they're hardwired against it from either personal trauma or some kind of repetitive behavior in their life that has suppressed the ability for that biochemical reaction. I hope when you listen to this podcast, you understand that I think I'm talking about theories and strategies and tactics that work for the majority of consumers, the majority of employees, the majority of people sitting in an audience listening to your speech. But there are always going to be outliers. And that's the nature of humanity, is that we all sit on this bell curve, this spectrum. But for the most part, what Paul found was that his subjects in this study really did react in a powerfully emotional way. And in fact, when he did a side-by-side study, in marketing we call this an A/B test, he changed the nature of the story. He took out the emotion. Ben and his father simply go to the zoo, and we see them doing things at the zoo. And of course, there was a different reaction from the subjects in his study. They were not as engaged in this second zoo story as they were in the first story. And Paul describes how very soon after the opening scene of the zoo story, people's attention started to dwindle. And that's because what Paul was doing, and he describes this in other essays. There's an essay that he wrote for the Harvard Business Review that is extraordinary, and I highly recommend you go Google it, is Paul talks about how the narrative arc of Exposition Scene, kind of opens it up and we see something happening and we've got a choice to make. So let's go back to Ben and his dad. Let's say that you are not a person who's ever dreamed of fatherhood. Let's say you're a person who's not too much into emotional parenting kind of scenes or movies or books. You may not move past that exposition scene. But I think for the majority of us, I would imagine most Americans, Canadians, anybody listening to this, you probably have been a parent or maybe even are right now. And as a result, you're going to pay attention for those first couple of seconds and go, oh, a parenting scene. I can affiliate with that. But then we need to start creating tension. We need to say, okay, yes, I'm a parent, but why are you trying to keep my attention? Well, I'm trying to keep your attention because the boy in this scene and the father who is caring and loving this child are dealing with one of the greatest tragedies of life. And now what we're doing is we're transporting into that story. And Paul Zak writes a lot about transportation and how if you create the right elements in a story, whether it's strictly visual, whether it's a voiceover like Ben's father, even if it's just the captions on a screen in your social media post, if you are telling a story that personifies a emotion, a situation that is compelling, the people most likely to want to feel that with you because they have a deeper affiliation with the concept. They're going to transport themselves into that scene. And that's where the neuroscience begins, because now the brain is sending off signals to different parts of your body to send these chemicals out. And oxytocin is one of the big ones. And now what's starting to happen is you're getting emotionally involved in the story. Think about it. How many times have we watched a slasher film and screamed at the screen, look behind you? Why are you doing that? You know it's a movie. You know you've seen 50 million slasher films, but still you've got this ability to say, what if I was standing there and that person with that chainsaw was standing right behind me? I would want somebody to protect me and look after me. And so, it's really a natural human emotion. And when we create marketing and blogs and content that allows somebody to slowly work their way into this scene that we're creating, that has greater power to help us want to perform the behaviors at the end of this. And then, of course, at some point we reach a climax. In this particular case, I think the climax was, if you donate to the research to stop children's brain cancer, we can eliminate the likelihood that there will be more Bens and Ben's dads, and maybe even you or someone you know or love having to go through these horrible emotions. And that's also the falling action in denouement. So we get to that point, we give people a call to action. If you're a speaker, that might be toward the end of the speech where you finally reached a crescendo, and then you've got another minute or two to resolve this whole 30 minutes that you've been speaking. And that's where you say, do you get it? Have I wrapped this up for you and tied all the loose ends for you so that you can leave this room thinking about how you can take those emotions and do something positive, whether I'm a people leader who's asking you for your followership, whether I'm a marketer trying to get you to go buy something. That's that narrative arc that's even happening in something like a speech. And so what Paul found in one case, he applied synthetic oxytocin to some subjects for this charitable affair. People were being paid money for participating in the study. So they had a decision to make. Do I keep the money that this university is giving me, this science center is giving me, or do I donate it? What happened was the subjects chose 57% more charities to donate than the placebo group, and they donated 56% more than the placebo group. So Paul believes that that's a clear indication that people are definitely more inclined to take action when we tell content in a story form. And I truly believe this. I have seen it a million times. I've had executives in meetings break into a story, and you can see everybody around the table in the conference hall at the big ballroom. You can see them get more engaged and understand the concept that that leader was trying to articulate better. I have had the privilege of working for some great storytellers, and as a result, their organizations were really capable of driving superior results. I worked for a sales and client management organization selling card acceptance. And the SVP who ran the organization was a phenomenal storyteller. And when he was in those moments telling stories, it was amazing how the people around him would just be staring intently. And again, we always exceeded our goals. That is the power of storytelling. I've seen it in so many other places. I've seen it in my own speeches. When I am out speaking, I drop tons of stories on my audience, and I watch the dabbing of the eyes. I watch the laughter. I watch the people lining up at the end of my speech to come and hand me their business card. They are engaged. Now, does everybody do that? No, because we are not a monolithic universe. But for those people most likely to purchase something from me in my storytelling that sells business, I am so much more efficient and effective focusing on the people who will have that emotional reaction than someone who's going to struggle and take up more of my time, maybe cancel a subscription after a couple of weeks because they're just not getting it. They thought they were motivated to do it, but now they find that they're not really capable of integrating that emotionally and intellectually. They could probably do it if they could overcome that emotional intellectual disconnect, but they can't. And that's okay. I'd rather have fewer of those clients because they're more of a inefficient way for me to spend my time coaching that. So, when we have another person's story in our presence, it really does build that common ground. That, I think, is what Paul Zak has found throughout the years. Think about relationships that you have, the ones that lasted the longest, the ones that have been the most powerful, the people you can call in an instant and get assistance from. There's some kind of common story you've been sharing. It's why, there are so many powerful women's groups. I know a woman who runs a group travel company for women of a certain age who want to travel, but don't want to travel alone, and they don't have somebody else in their life. She's finding so many of her clients from a Facebook group tied into that demographic, tied into that psychographic. She's tapping into that commonality and the emotions that those people are all living day to day, living their stories, sharing them in this private group, and her marketing to say, well, come and join us. And you'll have more of that good feeling. That works for her. And she's very, very successful. So let's wrap this up with one more story. So there's a man named Daryl Davis. If you Google him, I believe it's Daryl with one R. Daryl is a musician. He's a Black man. And he decided many years ago, instead of arguing with white supremacists, with Ku Klux Klan members about their beliefs, he decided to listen to them first. And as he listened to them talk about their beliefs, he would parrot back to them the same type of beliefs, but about their race, about being white. And that commonality of logic, wait, what I just said to you as a universal theme, you've now pushed it back on me and said, well, if that's a universal theme, then why isn't it the same for you? They could find some intellectual common ground. And what Daryl has done over time, between face-to-face meetings, getting to know white supremacists and letting them get to know him as a human being, is, according to Daryl, he has helped 200 white supremacists throw down their arms, hand over their white hoods, choose to live their lives a different way. And Daryl's story, and there's a 60 Minutes program on him. I've seen other news programs interview him and follow him around at KKK rallies. He is a powerful example of how Paul Zak is right, that there is a chemical connection we all have the potential to share that can be tapped in for good, and as I said earlier, for evil. And storytelling really does sell to our brains in a very, very unique way. So as I close out episode number 3, what I wanted you to walk away from and be able to use as tips and tricks is go back to, if you're a business owner and you have a social media handle, go back to the last 8 to 10 posts and ask yourself, are there any stories in those posts that seem to have caused a reaction from the people whom I have tried to reach? These are my potential clients. These are my existing customers. I'm trying to get them to act in a certain way, and I post this content. Go look at that content and see which ones have performed the best. If they perform the best, ask yourself, are there any stories being told, either in the photographs, the video, the text, a combination of all of the above, that perhaps lent itself to such a strong engagement? If you're not finding that that happened, then what I would like you to do as you look at those posts is ask yourself, if I could have told a story about that product or that service, if you are just pushing content out there and not maybe writing a quick narrative that says to the person, here's the exposition scene. The other day I was on the internet and I was reading blogs and I found this one and it made me remember an incident in my life. And that validates the theory behind the way I operate and the way that I bring services and products to my clients. You might want to go and read the article. You also might want to give me a call because I get what this person's trying to articulate. And if this is of interest in you, then I can help you pursue this strategy. I can help you enjoy or fulfill yourself with the product or service that we're all talking about here on my handle. Ask yourself if you might be able to write those narratives, and then go do it. Try it. Even if you've posted something, it doesn't mean you can't post it a second time in a different way with a different picture or a longer text narrative. Try different experiments with your content, with the narrative form, the way that Paul Zak talks about. Search for ways to transport somebody into a scene and see whether or not there's a difference. I have seen it happen a million times. Does it happen consistently? There are so many variables in social news feeds that could cause a different reaction. And I will caution you, if you're just starting to take your content in the storytelling direction and you've never done it before, people haven't expected that from you. So it may take time before enough people are engaging with that content. The algorithm then starts showing it to even more people because now it's saying, wow, there are people who follow this website, this social handle that really like this. I'm going to show more people this person's newsfeed. That is a formula that could take time. So don't make an initial decision that, no, this doesn't work. You kind of have to stick with it and stick with it consistently before you start to see a reaction from people. So I'd love for you to try those tips. Without a doubt, let me know if they're working. Please subscribe to the podcast. I will be exploring storytelling in all its forms. I've got an incredible former people leader who I wrote a speech for. I'm going to be interviewing him soon about how we didn't use storytelling and how I didn't tap into that superpower back in the 1990s when he and I worked at American Express. That's the kind of content you sign up for when you subscribe to the channel. So please do stick with me and offer me subjects and ideas. Go to Storytelling That Sells on Facebook, on Instagram, on my website. You can drop a note to me. We actually have a page for the blog there where you can submit an interview subject that you'd like to nominate or a topic that you would like to hear me discuss. This is meant to be your story and my story and the story of storytelling all coming together in a much more dynamic narrative. And I'm really hoping you'll take me up on that and be a part of the program. With that, I'm going to sign off. I do hope this is enriching you, and I do believe that if you start to deploy these skills and strategies, you're going to see that storytelling really does sell. Take care. I'll see you soon.